Hello and welcome to part 3 of our lecture on Middle Age costume history. This will deal solely with the 14th century. The 14th century, also known as the High Middle Ages. Let's jump right in with men's clothing. You're going to start seeing more and more a variation on clothing in both men and women. This is sort of the high point, the first high point of medieval clothing. So let's start out with the most common of Middle Ages or medieval garments, the doublet or pourpoint. Called pourpoint because it was 4 points, right? Here you see, remember the points? See them right here. They are built into a lot of doublets. So this is allow you to tie off your chausses. It's kind of unusual. Well, we'll get to that picture later. Also, some things to point out: the capelet, this thing right here with my little arrow, with a scalloped edge, this decorative edging known as scallops, which is just basically little tongues. Now, eventually, the doublet will get more sophisticated, or excuse me, will get an add-on by something known as the jacket or jack. That should be easy to remember, which was a high-collared, well, for lack of a better word, a jacket. Usually sleeveless, so that you can see the sleeves of the doublet through. So you see here, this courtier, it has a jacket, and you can see the sleeves coming through. So the jacket is more like a vest in this case. Incidentally, this style was very popular in the 14th, 15th century. It's called parti-colored, where panels of contrasting fabrics were used in jacket, doublet, chausses, and even shoes, as you see here. Now we come to the biggest explosion in men's fashion starting in the 14th century, and that is the Hoopaland. You can see here. Now the Hoopaland is a garment for the court and for nobility and for rich merchants. It is a long tunic, almost a gown, fitted on top with a high collar. It is very ornate. The skirt is usually flared, possibly pleated or rolled into tubular folds. We'll talk about that in a bit. Here we see a man here. We'll talk about his hat a little later on. Here we see a man who's got a chain. So he's probably some kind of courtier. You see there, if I can get my, high collar and just very extravagant, very rich. You're not going to find the middle, well, there's not really a middle class, but if there was, they wouldn't wear this. Rich merchants, aristocracy, as I said. A couple of other things. The decorative edging is known as foliating because it looks like little leaves. This is different from scalloping in the previous slide because that was more tongue-like. This is more leaf type. I hope that helps. This sleeves are known as dogaline. That's not the style of the sleeve. The style is funnel, which we'll talk about in a moment. But dogaline means turned back. Usually have a pretty decorative lining to show. Most times hoopalands are worn with a leather belt at the waistline. And you can see here, that's what it is. Okay, usually they're floor length, but sometimes you have a short one with heavy pleating in the skirt area. You can see here with this man wearing his chausses or hose, he has a short hoopaland. You can tell it's hoopaland because it is belted. It has the high neckline. You can see the high collar, and it is very ornate. The sleeve type that was in the previous slide is known as a funnel sleeve. It's different from angel or pendant sleeves because it's not fitted at the elbow as the previous sleeves. It is fitted at the shoulder and then flares out into a giant funnel. Cote hardie, remember that from way back when in the 13th century, still around. There were some innovations, tippet sleeves, you can see here, button rows. These are buttoned on the front, but they are not practical. They're just a row of buttons, but they won't open anything up. And again, scalloped edging. Also, among merchants, this very opulent outer cloak is called a hoose, or hoose, spelled different, but the same. The hoose is a long, wide, skirted overcoat with long, fitted bagpipe sleeves. They're bagpipes because they start out wide and flaring, and then they're fitted at the cuff, like a bagpipe. I show the difference here just to make sure you understand. A hoose has sleeves. A guard corps, which you've seen before, is basically sleeveless, just slits in the open. So that's the difference between the two. As I said, there are quite a few variations. Yay! The tabard, way back when, the tabard you remember in previous centuries is now adapted by servants, heralds, and pages. There are two types. The one on the left is a herald, is a servant or page. It is basically a square panel clasper tied over one shoulder. The other is a panel that hangs front and back with an opening in the middle for the head. Both are very helpful. I think the person on the right is a herald, and you can put your lord's sigil, emblazoned right on it so everybody will know who you represent. Very handy. Women's clothing. The cote hardie continues to be worn. Here we see one with a wide funnel sleeve. We still have a chemise underneath, generally sheer linen with an embroidered hem. However, we're starting to see in the High Middle Ages, we're starting to see less and less churchiness, and the social mores are loosening up somewhat, so the décolletage is dropping for women's clothing. Okay, bear with me here. So, cote hardie, fitted, the 8-gourd dress, we start to see it be replaced by a more generically termed gown or robe. Now, they're better fitted than the cote hardie and had wider, fuller skirts, as you can see here. So try to differentiate between the two. What's the big difference? The cote hardie is earlier. The gown is later. It's basically the same. There's just some variations. And now people just say gown or robe instead of having to say the whole cote hardie. So, and cote hardie is very French. As it goes out across Europe and other areas, they're going to have their own words, but everybody pretty much goes on gown and robe. You also see the waistline was raised to just under the bosom. So the waistline has raised, the skirts have flared out more, and there you have it. These are slip-on garments. You can see here button rows. Button rows. Those are just rows of decorative buttons. They don't unclasp anything. They just look pretty. That's all we're asking. Surcoats become more stylized. Remember, the women adapted the surcoat from soldiers, and they become more and more open. So much so that they're now known as sideless gowns, worn over a cote hardie or a gown. Decorative fur trim. Some have low décolletage, like the woman on the left. A little higher, the woman on the right. Stepping out with her man in a Hoopaland. This is something you'll see a lot. You'll see in a lot of these surcoat sideless gowns, this stiff panel in front. This is known as a plastron front. Placard, some people say placard, but we're going to say plastron. Just this sort of stiff, decorative front frame. You'll see this more and more in some dresses, and it's a term used to this day for a panel, decorative panel in the front. In the late 14th century, women said, we want our own Hoopaland. So here we see this one is damask silk, wide sleeves, a long train, and a lower neckline than the male version. So the difference between male and female is the neckline. High in men, lower in women, longer train, as you can see. Some men's Hoopaland will have trains. Women definitely will have trains. And, of course, expensive and opulent. Shoes. This is the poulain, or the Krakow, but poulain is generally more used. This is an actual shoe. It is made of leather. It is laced up the side. You can see here in this authentic 500, 600-year-old shoe, the lacing still on the side. And it was a long point at the toe. Back at the beginning of this section, I had talked about some sumptuary laws, say men and women under a certain class could not wear shoes longer than 3-inch points. Well, this is why. This is a status symbol. The pointier your shoe, the more important you are. In the 14th century, there was an explosion in headgear, which is great for fashion. Not so great to try to remember them all, but some fascinating ones. Women had some beautiful, fascinating, very characteristic headdresses for the 14th century, particularly the hennin and the caul. You can see at the top is the hennin, this steeple headdress, richly embroidered. This one has a velvet gown We have the caul, which was evolved from jeweled hairnets worn in the end of the 13th century. And this evolved into two padded cylinders crisscrossed with gold threads and studded with pearls or jewels. Incidentally, this was also the inspiration for Princess Leia's hairstyle in Star Wars: A New Hope. The most popular men's headdress at the time, particularly among those who had the money, was this soft headscarf called the chaperone, with the ends draped to one side. And we had seen this picture, right, this gentleman earlier on the far right. He has a chaperone with a liripipe, the liripipe draped over his shoulder and crawling down his back. Not crawling, that would be unsettling. Hanging down his back, I should say. Other pipes, the sugarloaf and the bagpipe, called that for obvious reasons. Knights, yay! They continue to make their transition from chain to plate, so we might start to see more and more of the traditional knight's armory. The helmet is a bassinet. The camail is that mail collar there. You'll see more and more of these little, you can see here I'm pointing these little plates on the elbows and shoulders to protect those soft areas between joints of armor. Those are called pallets. If you're going to protect your upper arm, you're going to need demi-brassards. You're going to need elbow cops to protect your elbow, and of course the ever-prevalent braces, van braces, to protect your lower arm. Lower arm? Yes. Wait, we're not done yet. A few more. Legs are protected by plate greaves. Right, the greaves cover the shin, and knee cops that help cover the knees. Interesting thing here, the gambeson, remember the padded undertunic, and the male hauberk are still worn, but the surcos is pretty heavy, and this armor is starting to weigh something. It is not insignificant, so we need a lighter garment to show your heraldry out front. This is called the cyclus. We have prick spurs on this guy, as you can see. Remember all the lovely prick spur. But you know what? Even in the 14th century, some knights didn't really keen on stabbing their faithful steeds with a little prick thingy, so we're starting to see more rowel spurs. Those are the round ones like you see cowboys wear. And then solerettes, which are 5 connected plates that cover the feet. Very important. Thus endeth part 3. Middle-aged fashion history. In the 4th and final section, we'll talk about the 15th century and show some examples. Thank you.